The Constitution sees Congress as the premier political institution. And Congress, through its incompetence, has been letting that power leak away from it for decades now. And they write laws that you can drive a truck through with these clauses. So like every fourth paragraph in this bill, I say that a little bit metaphorically, but every so often it says, do this and do this and do this, except if in the opinion of the Secretary of Homeland Security's, you want to do something else, or it's the best interest of the United States, or you feel like doing it, do that. So this is the way American immigration law is written, all these laws. It's like, here's the law, unless you want to do something different.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it is just me. We had a streak, 3 episodes where Nick and I were doing it together, but alas, our travel schedules did not overlap in this case. But we did have a fantastic episode for you guys today, all about the immigration issue, one of the key important issues in American politics today. We had on Jim Robb, who's the vice president of alliances and activism at NumbersUSA. He was born in West Texas. He has been involved with NumbersUSA since its founding 27 years ago and is the author of a new book. But before I get to that, be sure as always to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find the backlog of this show, everything else we have cooking as an organization, including our various programs. You can sign up for AM Fridays, which is our lecture series on Capitol Hill. It's underway now. Every Friday, Chick-fil-A boxes in a room in the U.S. Senate. Come listen to foundational lectures on important issues like immigration, China, trade, foreign policy, etc., and get to know the American Moment team. If you're interning in Washington or you have interns coming into Washington this summer, this spring, this is the place to send them. We also, I think, are closed on our summer application for the Fellowship for American Statecraft, but I believe we have our fall interest form already up and running, so be sure to fill that out. We are eagerly sorting through our summer applications. I saw some pretty good ones in the pile, and so we're excited to bring in our 4th summer class, and our first spring class ever has already started. So, and then finally, we have our Gala for American Statecraft. This is the 3-year anniversary of American Moment, a big celebration with our friends and biggest supporters here in Washington, D.C. on March 6th, 2024. Be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org/gala. You can find everything about that. David Sachs is going to be getting the 3rd Rail Award for Public Courage. Senator J.D. Vance is going to be speaking. Congressman Mark Meadows is going to be leading the VIP reception. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. So we're really excited to celebrate with all of you. If you'd like to sponsor it, be sure to reach out. We would always love to take your money. And there's some pretty cool sponsorship opportunities available. Anyway, back to Jim. Jim was born in West Texas. He was a voracious reader of newspapers and books, always hungry to learn more. He's been at NumbersUSA for 27 years, and he helped develop political activism across the web. He has written a book, Political Migrants, Hispanic Voters on the Move, How America's Largest Minority is Flipping Conventional Wisdom on Its Head. I promise he's not saying that Hispanics vote Republican, therefore we should have open borders. Quite the opposite. He's saying that all is not lost, and that it's going to be Hispanic voters that give us the political capabilities to actually implement immigration restrictionism once and for all, because they don't like mass migration either. So it was an absolutely fantastic episode. We talked about this crazy Senate border bill that just crashed and burned, why HR 2 was so much better, talked about his book. We talked about what he's afraid is coming down the line in terms of the border crisis, and all the harassment he's gotten along the way. I will say, when I taped this episode, I landed at 7 a.m., actually no, 5 a.m. At JFK in New York City from Israel. And then I wandered straight to another terminal and came back to Washington and have been at work all day. I'll tell you, caffeine alone could not sustain me on days like this. And that's why we're so glad to partner on this show with Magic Mind. It's this little lovely green bottle. It's full of all sorts of incredible ingredients like organic matcha green tea, organic agave passion fruit, natural vanilla, olive oil, ashwagandha, Macopa moniere, rhodiola rosea, and a bunch of other things I probably couldn't pronounce if you put it right in front of me. You drink it right after your coffee, and it helps even you out throughout the day. It makes it so you're not a crazy person attacking people left and right. And it's really helped me be productive. I keep a crazy travel schedule, as many of you know. And so it's an absolutely fantastic product. And you can go to magicmind.com/truth20, and that'll give you a discount code to buy it. We stock it in the office all the time. I scream at Nick whenever it's not present and he reorders it. You can get on a subscription. It's just absolutely fantastic. Buy some of these little green shots. Magic Mind. Once again, that's magicmind.com/truth20 to get a discount from American Moment. We'll go now to Jim Robb. Jim, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Saurabh, glad to be here.
We always like to hear about how our guests got to where they are today. You have a long and storied career fighting for some pretty important issues. Tell us that story. How does one get involved in being, one of the most demonized people in Washington?
Well, I started off life as the son of a Methodist clergyman in West Texas, and I got myself to Kentucky to a Methodist religious college, and where I went to college, and then when I graduated, I got into religious publishing for about 10 years. And when the Republicans won in 1994, I said, if I'm ever going to move to Washington and pursue my second love of politics, now's the time. So I just up and moved. And I started making calls, and I thought I could probably get a job as a press secretary. It was my ambition with one of the new Republican congressmen. But I found out you basically have to have a relationship with a campaign to move in that position, or already be on the Hill. So that proved very, very difficult. I came in second, like in 5 or 6 offices to get that job. So I called my old friend Roy Beck, who I'd known back in the day. And I said, Roy, what are you doing these days? He said, immigration. I said, well, tell me about it. And he told me about it. And he said, are you interested in writing some immigration research articles? I said, well, you bet. And I started writing some articles for him for some various publications. And after a while, I helped him make this video about immigration and world gumballs and world immigration.
Oh yeah. And the legendary gumball video. We'll link it below. It's so interesting.
Yeah. So we made the first version of that. There've been 2 versions, and so we sort of rented out an office and had a bunch of VHS videotapes that we were trying to give away, and we even had infomercial time that we rented on cable networks to tell people about this thing, to try to give them away. We had a modest grant to do that. And so we gave away about 40,000 over a few years. And then one day someone uploaded it to a new thing called Google Video, the precursor to YouTube. And it immediately went to #1 of all the videos they had on Google Video. And it stayed #1 for about 3 months. And then it went to #1 political video they had. And it was the #1 political video for years.
Wow.
And so we thought, based on that, in a book.
Would you just explain for our listeners what the gumball video is? Just the basic details of it.
Right. So Roy he had a demonstration he developed for his son's 8th grade class. It's kind of bring your dad to work day. No, it was bring your dad to school, and he tells about his work. That's it. And so he did this demonstration with a big canister of gumballs, and he showed why it was impossible to cure world poverty by bringing people to the United States. And he had these canisters of gumballs. And so every year, America would take about 1 million immigrants from around the world. So he put one of these large, colorful gumballs into the jar, and the jar is pretty near full and already. And then he'd say, but every year the people of the world are producing 80 million more people, births over deaths. at that time. Maybe it's a little bit less now. And so he would pour that into another jar. And he say, then we take another million, say we take 2 million a year. And every year these people are everyone else is producing like 80 million more people. He says, and he does this 2 or 3 times, and pretty soon it spills over, right? And famously, we got the shot when we did the video of it spilling all over the floor. And it just goes everywhere. He says the problem is we can never take care of this problem by doing this.
Yeah.
So he says, we really want to help people. We have to help them where they live, because 99% of them could never come to the United States. They're too poor. He said the really poor people can't come here anyway. It's the people who are higher up on the totem pole that can, or the pecking order that can make it. So that was that. And also there was a demonstration of how big the population of the U.S. was going to be if we continue at the present pace. And it was, it's a striking thing visually. In 2016, a truck driver in England had a Facebook page, and he uploaded this YouTube video onto Facebook without asking us. And it became a sensation on both sides of the Atlantic. The thing has been seen about 175 million times.
Wow.
It may be the biggest political video that's ever been made. So a lot of people say, Numbers USA, what's that? I say, gumball video. Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. So you went to go work on Numbers, and you helped produce the gumball video.
That's right. We started Numbers USA 27 years ago. It was a year or two after we made the video, but demand had started and people were interested. And we did it because Congress there was a commission that was headed by Barbara Jordan, who was a famous Black American congresswoman from Houston. And she was a former congresswoman by that time. And she's a Democrat. And she was appointed by Bill Clinton to head a commission to straighten out U.S. immigration policy, rationalize it, modernize it. They came up with a good proposal. And unfortunately, by the time they were ready to submit it to Congress, she died in, I think, 1996. And the Clinton White House kind of was being pushed by the left of the Democratic Party to back off of this thing, because they were going to suggest that we somewhat lower immigration and then modernize it in many ways. That we do E-Verify. This was the commission that started the E-Verify project and make that mandatory. So anyway, that didn't go through. Only a few of those things went through. And so we started Numbers USA to try to get those proposals through.
Fantastic. There's so much in the history of the immigration issue, and I find myself having to remind people all the time that every time you think you can strike a grand bargain with the left on this issue, they will lie to you. It is not worth it. They cannot be trusted. And patriots like yourself and Mark Krikorian and others over the years have really eloquently described why that's the case. I think it'd be really helpful for our audience, and this is the bulk of what I want to talk about today. This Senate border deal that was headed up by Senator Lankford and a couple of other senators, bipartisan deal. What's wrong with it? It seems to have been killed for now. But I think it's a perfect synecdoche of all of the major issues that exist when it comes to actually doing immigration policy in Washington. Take it in whatever direction you want, but would love to just get your 10,000 foot view, and then we'll get granular.
From 10,000 feet, the problem with the bill is it gives the executive, the administration, more power. And the problem is power needs to be taken away from the administration. So the Constitution sees Congress as the premier political institution. And Congress, through its incompetence, has been letting that power leak away from it for decades now. And they write laws that you could drive a truck through with these clauses. So like every fourth paragraph in this bill, I say that a little bit metaphorically, but every so often it says, do this and do this and do this, except if in the opinion of the Secretary of Homeland Security's, you want to do something else, or it's the best interest of the United States, or you feel like doing it, do that. So this is the way American immigration law is written, all these laws. It's like, here's the law, unless you want to do something different. And so because of that, well, probably it was written that way because it's so complex, and then Congress has such a hard time agreeing on things, right? But it also expects that the president will be faithful to apply the laws that Congress passes. But we've seen in both parties for a few decades the desire to presidents become impatient with the process, and they want to, if the Congress won't do what they want to rewrite the laws themselves. And you always feel good about it as long as it's your guy, but it's not always going to be your guy. So the next guy gets in, he does just the opposite. And this is why we have laws, so that we have something that's set down. It's the process. Every party has to follow it. But things aren't working that way right now, because this is one of the real problems we have in our form of government today. The executive's gotten too much power, and Congress, like this bill, the Senate bill, is only reinforcing that. So they were going to solve the problem of the border by giving Biden more power. And the problem is that Biden has used the power he's already had to ignore the law, to roll over all the constitutional norms. And he's got way too much power already. They need to be taking away power. So actually, the House of Representatives passed a wonderful bill called H.R. 2 in late last spring. And it would solve the whole problem with the border. And in, I think, June, the Senate took up that bill. It was going to be attached as an amendment to a spending measure. And I think 46 senators voted to do that. And 2 Republicans weren't there to vote for it. That would have been 48. So they only have 49 senators. It came close to passing. My point is, a really good bill nearly passed in the Senate, but all Democrats opposed it. Because why? They're guys in the White House. Now, if it were Trump in the White House, they would be doing the opposite. They'd be saying, "Oh, we don't want the president usurping the constitutional role of the Congress." But this is one of our big problems in government today, is that each party in government thinks that they're the cheerleader of the president, as long as it's their party. But that things aren't going to function well as long as they have that attitude.
So chop it up for me in a couple pieces. What were the major elements of this border proposal, and what was the problem that they were trying to solve, and why was their solution inadequate?
Right. Their solution was inadequate because they did not agree beforehand what their goals were. Mm-hmm. If their goal was to eliminate illegal immigration, they would have taken a different tack. Mm-hmm. That's obviously not what their goal was, because this bill could never do it. So I think they were working from the idea that they're going to improve the situation, reduce illegal immigration without cutting into the president's power. So the bill, we have a couple of problems at the border that created this. Part of it is not caused by Biden, and part of it is. So all around the world, we have people trying to game the asylum process. This is every advanced country in the world has this now. So we have to go back to World War II. And the World War II, we had a lot of people who needed to get out of what country they were in, because otherwise they'd be killed, and there was no real mechanism in the world to handle this. So after the war, the asylum system, as we now know it, was set up internationally on a couple of treaties. And so it's it sets a process where people can come to a country and say, look, I'm going to be persecuted or killed in my country. If I stay there, I have to come here. Will you listen to my claims? And there's a court process. And if the judge says, yeah, that sounds right. You sound like you've got enough evidence here. We'll grant you asylum. You really become something like a refugee here, but it puts you on a path to citizenship. And okay, well, the immigration lawyers of the world got a hold of this some time ago and said, gee, if we get people to a border and they say this magic speech about being persecuted, then we can jam up the system and they'll have to deal with the claims, and we can get the courts so backlogged that our people can get into the country in this sort of semi-legal, semi-illegal status. And by the time anyone's heard their claims, it'll be too late. They'll be so ensconced into the American fabric. So this problem's happening all around the world. We're doing one of the poorest jobs of dealing with it. That's the first thing. The second thing is something called a parole authority, which is in American law. So the president can, or his government can, bring people into the country even if they show up without a visa under parole. This sort of means even if you don't have any legal right to be here, it looks like you've got a humanitarian reason, and we're going to let it slide with you. Come on in. And it was really envisioned and used for a long time for like medical reasons mostly. If someone showed up, they're dying of cancer, only your country has a doctor that can help me, but I'm sorry, I don't have a visa. Okay, you go there. We'll straighten your situation out later. But the President Biden saw this as since there weren't firm limits in the law, he found this loophole, and now hundreds of thousands of people, a year, are being brought in by whole categories, not one at a time, and certainly not for medical reasons or something legitimate like that, but maybe favored people groups. Maybe if you're from Venezuela, you're going to be waved in under parole, and we're talking 600,000-700,000 people a year, and people with these bogus asylum claims similar. So we're between everything that's happening and the people who overstay their visitor visas and people who just flat out sneak across the border. We're having maybe a couple of million people a year coming into this country on an illegal basis, and in some of them, and then the administration allowing them in. They come in, their court dates for the asylum claims are set out maybe 10 years from now. And even if and very few of them would ever pass the asylum test. I mean, just a fractional, tiny number. It's all bogus. Everyone knows it's bogus. No one's deceived by that.
So what was the Senate's proposed solution to this broken asylum process, and why did it fall short?
If the illegal traffic at the borders reaches 5,000 a day, it would have the bill would have given the president the authority to expel people without giving them a hearing and giving them a hearing far in the future and then letting them into the U.S. But
5,000 times 365, that's,
hundreds of thousands.
1.5 million and change.
That's right. That's right. And he didn't have to shut down the border. That he could do it if he wanted to. He could also say he didn't want to do that and not do it. But under no case could he let less than 1,400 completely unqualified immigrants in a day. In other words, even when it's shut down, what's 1,400 times 365? So it's like 500,000 a year. That's the minimum number of which to any normal administration, this would be like an incredible emergency. That was the level that this law would say that's the least amount of illegal immigration that we could accept. So it was a bizarre law that seems mostly not wanting to hurt the prerogative of Biden and whoever follows Biden to break the law. Well, it would make it lawful. But these people, it wouldn't make these people have claims. They wouldn't have a visa. They wouldn't have good asylum claims. These were the 1,400 that would be the minimum. These were people who have absolutely no claims on coming to America, but they would have to process them into being compliant. So it would make the situation probably worse by putting a high floor on illegal immigration. Let's see, it would increase the credible fear standard, but only small. It instead of basically now it's just if someone gives a story that's possible they're being persecuted. Now it's I think the word was reasonable. So that's a very small difference. As opposed to the House bill, which that makes it more probable than not that a judge would rule in favor. Let's see. Unaccompanied children are completely exempted by the law. So in other words, 1 million could march across the border and that would not trigger.
And when we say children, do we mean like children, or like, it looks like a 24-year-old military age male, but he's 16, we promise.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
What we've got now. So, let's see. The bill would give immediate work permits to aliens released from custody. Now it's a process. Not into this bill that would be given immediately. And it adds 50,000 additional green cards a year for 5 years. So that's 250,000 more green cards to compete with American workers for no reason, except that anytime there's an immigration bill, the immigration expansionists want to put in more green cards. Does not mandate construction of the wall. The bill would not. Does not end catch and release. Instead,
explain catch and release.
Catch and release is so the law, as it is now, mandates that if someone comes and claims asylum, while their case is being while they're waiting to hear their case, they have to be in detention, but they don't do it. So they're sort of caught in between not having enough facilities and certain court orders, and just the policy of the administration. And so they just release them into the country. I mean, they release them that day. So what the law says, if you come in, you say, I'm being persecuted, what it envisioned is may have to wait around for a few weeks to get your hearing and you decide or not. And if it's turned down, you're ejected from the country. Instead, what happens, people come, they make that claim. Everybody knows there's nothing. They have no documentation. They have nothing. And they're released that day with the order to appear in 5 or 10 years. Very few of them will ever even apply for asylum. To claim it when you come across the border is not to apply for it. That's a whole different process. And few of them even do that, less than half. And then very, very few ever see it all the way through the court because the judges throw them out because there's nothing to it. These are just economic refugees. And that just means they want the job.
What's that number what's the ratio of people who claim asylum and actually accepted asylees?
Well, of those who get the cases they get to the court, I think it's like 15% are accepted.
And that's the cases that get to the court is less than half of. Mm-hmm. So we're talking single digits numbers of asylees are actual legit. And
it's all bogus.
I'm sure that the rate of acceptance of asylees is also artificially high. Like these judges are probably somewhat ideologically motivated, and
they might be. Some of them are okay, some are not. Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, what if you're really being persecuted? Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine, and people are persecuted regularly because mm-hmm. there are 5 things I think that are illegitimate under American law. It's a religious persecution, political beliefs. You're a part of an unfavored people group. Maybe you're some kind of minority. Racial. I think there's one more. Religious, do we say that? Mm-hmm. And so if you're really, someone's like coming to your village, they're going to shoot you. Most people in that situation go to another part of the country. I mean, people are not trying to, unless it's the government of the country. It's like they don't even know who you are in some other village. So most people just move, mm-hmm. right? But what if it's the government? When that happens too, right? So you normally go to the next country over because they're not trying to shoot you over there. It's a different government. They don't care. Right. So these people who are coming to America, they're no longer coming from Mexico. They're coming from they're passing through 4, 5, 6 safe countries to get here. Well, that's also against the law. They're supposed to apply for asylum in the closest safe country to their own country. I mean, if they really just wanted to be safe, they wouldn't come up here. They're coming up here because they want the American dream.
And of course, that's understandable. But
sure, like
the gumball metaphor well demonstrates, you can't sustain that for just about everyone. How did H.R. 2, the House bill that a lot of immigration patriots thought was really quite high quality, how did it deal with these problems, namely asylum to start with?
Okay. Well, it substantially raised the credible fear standard and closed asylum loopholes. And so right now people make a little speech that's printed out by the lawyers, the cartels, whatever, and they just say these words and they're pretty much they're allowed in. That would no longer be the case. And also it gets rid of catch and release. So you would no longer be able to be released. If it couldn't be held here, we'd put you in Mexico. I mean, it would make a kind of a wait in Mexico program. It would put it more in law. I mean, and of course, Biden brought all this on himself. Biden's 100% responsible for this because he ran against Trump's policies, which were working to get down the number. It was not nothing. We still had a lot of people coming over, but we had a remain in Mexico policy. We had people were expelled more. We had the Title 42 thing that COVID allowed people to be returned immediately, and it got the numbers down. And Biden, on the very first day, he overturned all those policies. The remain in Mexico wasn't like we were sticking it to the Mexicans. This was an agreement with the government of Mexico to do this. So he just abrogated that I guess wasn't a treaty, but an agreement, and he put nothing in his place. So, I mean, Biden's the most non-creative president. He's destroyed a lot of stuff, but he's not done that much. So, at least in immigration policy. So, it's mostly what he tore down and failed to replace. And that's why it makes so many people wonder whether he's actually against illegal immigration at all. Sure doesn't seem like it.
So you were telling me right before we started taping the show that, for the historic immigration fights like Gang of Eight, you had, a year and a half to marshal a response to it. This time you guys had like 3 days.
Right.
Walk me through just the play-by-play Monday morning quarterback it for me. From the moment we started getting whispers that this deal was going to exist to what seems like its ultimate demise. How did that work, and what were you guys paying attention to throughout the process?
Well, first, of course, we were trying to get all the information from what the likely bill outline was. And it was leaking, so that was good. But we didn't know for sure. And they kept saying, Langford said, what you've heard, what's been leaked is not what the bill is. So pay no attention to that. It's going to be so much better than that. So, of course, even though we felt like the bill was going to be bad, we had to wait to see the text because who knows, maybe he was going to turn out to be right. So but what we did was we got our ducks in a row. We got our technology ready. We got our people were told for weeks, that is our activists, hundreds of thousands of activists back home. They were told that to expect this, start calling your senators now, tell them that we want HR 2, we don't want some watered down thing, and to put that pressure on. And education. Of course, we're working on the Hill. We're always working on the Hill. Our retained lobbyists and our dedicated staff, and working with all the coalitions we're part of, the many coalitions we're part of. And we're part of a formal coalition on this particular bill. They include Heritage and Judicial Watch, and I think CPI was a part of it. And a bunch of groups. So we were working together as usual, but also being ready. So then the bill drops finally. They said it would be dropped. The text would be dropped sometime between Saturday morning and Sunday night. So Grant Newman said that means Sunday night because they wanted to give people the least possible time to review it.
Of course.
So he pulls an all-nighter. We have all our legal analysts pulling all-nighters. And then, of course, every serious immigration specialist in Washington is pulling an all-nighter and going over this line by line. And so by Monday morning, we were ready. We started rolling out the publicity and the emails and the videos and everything to our people and telling them what's what, and, cry bloody murder, call your senators. And of course, and other groups were doing this as well. So the senators, the Republican senators, found out very quickly that people hated this bill, and this bill was nothing like what the backers said it was. It was not going to. So I don't know a single person, Saurabh, in this town who follows immigration policy for a living, who thinks that the Langford Senate border bill would cut down even illegal crossings. It might change the composition a little bit, but mostly it would make matters worse because it would put a floor on illegal immigration. And it's
and as Tom Cotton says, the correct amount of illegal immigration is zero.
Zero. You're right. One thing I like to say about one thing I think that people misunderstand this whole process is they think there's like two forces, and there are really three or more. People think or people who are border hawks like us. And then people think that there are people on the left who really want to open the borders. Well, that's true. But there's a huge other force, and the business right, represented by the business right, but also the bulk of the Democratic Party is bought into this too, which is that what we want to do is turn the illegal into legal immigration. So the way to solve illegal immigration. So this group says we don't want illegal immigration, but we want cheap labor. So the thing to do is to meet the people at the border. And instead of turning them away, we want to give them a green card or a work permit or something, bring them in. And now no more illegal immigration. And we've got plenty of cheap labor. Mm-hmm. And sorry, Americans who haven't gotten a raise for 40 years. You just have to keep waiting. So that's the big hidden power that's always at work. So that's why every time you get an immigration bill, not HR 2, it's a great bill, but usually you get something about another 250,000 green cards or something. They tend, like the Gang of Eight bill. This is so much reminds me of the Gang of Eight bill, which would have tripled immigration because everyone got in on the feeding frenzy on the creation of that bill. And they would have created whole new categories of immigration. Mm-hmm. Because if you start from a presupposition that the problem with America is that we don't have enough workers, then you're going to do everything possible to shoot up immigration. But if you start thinking, well, what's happening to the American workers we already have? Where are their opportunities? Who's mm-hmm. looking after their interests? You come to different conclusions.
Absolutely. What is this experience fighting this bill back while simultaneously getting one of the best immigration bills we've ever gotten passed through the House with HR 2 told you about the lay of the land in Congress on the immigration issue right now? If you had to handicap, compared to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, are we close to some sort of real comprehensive bill getting passed that might actually finally solve this problem? Or are we just as far as we've ever been?
We're pretty far off, unfortunately. I think Republicans have made progress. There's a large group of Republicans now who seem to care about American workers. When I first started this work, it was a much smaller group. I think the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had a pretty good lock on most of the Republican Party at that time, although there were many exceptions, many exceptions. But in the meantime, well, I'm looking at J.D. Vance's book right there, Hillbilly Elegy, which I read when it came out, and how powerful it was. And he's gotten himself in the Senate, and he's a powerful voice. There are many others who are worker oriented, and this is refreshing, right? So we hadn't had that much in the Senate before. And there's Tom Cotton and a whole group of them who Marco Rubio's been great in the last few years, and it gives me hope for the Republicans. And in the House, while we had Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House for a few years, he was a libertarian, and he felt that the market would solve all problems, basically. So, and businesses wanted more workers. By that, they mean more workers at the price we want to pay them. So things were worse in the past. I think things are better now, but unfortunately, the Democratic Party has moved further left. And when we started this work, we had lots of Democrats who were on our side. Less so now, but every once in a while, good new voices emerge. Now we've got Fetterman talking like he's interested in the American worker. The problem is we've got a kind of form of government that not too many people seem to be concerned about workers, right? Not just the working poor, but just workers. It's like the parties neither one are really centered on the people who are just trying to make it, and maybe they don't have as much education, maybe they don't have as many contacts, they don't have as much money, and their deal has gotten worse in the last few decades. When I was first coming to Washington as a young man visiting here, all the roofing in the city was done by Black people, and the cab drivers were Black too, Americans. But that's all changed to wholesale, and now it's done by recent immigrants, basically. So the problem is, the thing I wonder is, where have all these folks gone? Have they all gotten now jobs on Mahogany Row? They're all got executive jobs? No, to have someone underbid you and to get a job that you would have had doesn't mean you get automatically an opportunity to get a better job. It may explain why the worker participation rate has gone down for decades. We have people who, so if you have someone who's just gotten here from another country and they're willing to live in housing that Americans, it's kind of illegal for Americans to live in some of this housing, right? Because it's below code. And foreign worker flop houses is a big issue in the Washington suburbs. And they're not expecting much here. They're sending most of the money back home, and they don't have American expenses. And if they need a doctor, they may go to the emergency room, just show up. So a lower cost structure, maybe they're earning money under the table, right? So they're able to underbid. And then if the job site changes languages, then people who don't have a fancy education can't speak that language. And now they can't get a job there at all. So what happens to people like that? I don't think the American system and the American policy it's too much, it gives too much concern of those cases, but it's a big, big issue.
So I want to talk a little bit about the book that you've written that talks about Hispanic political participation in the United States. Why don't you give me just an overview of what the thesis of the book is, what interested you in this topic, and then we'll dive much deeper.
Yeah. So I head up the polling effort NumbersUSA, and we worked with a number of pollsters over the years. We worked with Kellyanne Conway for a few years before she went to the White House, and we've had a relationship with Rasmussen Polling for many years. And so we have every few weeks they're running another poll for us, and we ask immigration questions. And over the course of a year, we interview tens of thousands of people, or they do on our behalf, about immigration questions and other questions. And I noticed a trend starting about 10 years ago of Hispanics beginning to change their answers. I saw a movement, and I thought, well, this is interesting. And I'm interested in Hispanic culture anyway. I've traveled in South America and had family members living there. And I've come from Texas, a border state, and have been traveled extensively in the Hispanic heavier parts of Texas and speak some Spanish. So I was interested in it, but then I saw this in the polling and I said, is anyone paying attention to this? I think that Hispanics are going to be moving more Republican. And I think immigration is a part of the answer. And, you know, I was so puzzled or mystified because the way the media handled this issue was that they suggested that Hispanics are going to be more democratic, or at least more liberal, or maybe, and they're voting because Republicans are not enthusiastic enough about immigration, but especially because Republicans want to crack down on illegal immigration. They assumed that Hispanics would all be for illegal immigration. Well, I start seeing in the polls that no, this is very far from the truth. That Hispanics voters who are citizens are hostile and almost implacably hostile to illegal immigration. And so I started collecting all the other polling, and I started seeing as well with the nather of Republican fortunes with Hispanics was probably the Romney campaign. He got 27% of the vote, of the Hispanic vote. And after that happened, the very night that it happened, Republicans went into a complete meltdown and panic over that exit poll number and said, oh, the reason Romney, this is the take. The reason Romney lost was that he was hard on illegal immigration, and he should have instead said that we're going to open up the country and so that we can get Hispanics, because then they'll be for us, and then we can win elections, which we can never win. So all the immigration expansionist elements of American society and politics got together, starting immediately after the election, and made an immense effort to pass what became the Senate Gang of Eight bill that would have cranked up immigration, tripled it in the first decade and doubled it after that. So it took us a year and a half to knock that bill down from the time it was first proposed to the time the final nail went in the coffin. And it's a story. It's in the book as a little part of it. But so that bill didn't pass, and sure enough, as I was watching it, I guess maybe a lot of my interest came from that, because I just felt that these were that the Republican institutional take on what had happened on the election was 100% wrong. Mm-hmm. I felt that Romney was rejected by lots of groups because he had this aristocratic air. He didn't have the people's touch. And then you had a very, very talented politician in Obama, who Republicans had talked themselves into would be very easy to beat for a second term, but he was super talented, and people felt that he was more accessible, could have a beer with him and that sort of thing. Romney didn't seem like that. So anyway, sure enough, as I started focusing my efforts on this polling, I started doing specialty polling. And over time, the evidence became so clear that Hispanics were hostile to illegal immigration, but also that they had some other very unusual policy ideas that I saw that were going to lead more of them into the Republican Party. And so I proposed this book and wrote this book, and it was published in late 2022. And it's called Political Migrants, Hispanic Voters on the Move. So many of them have been literal migrants in our American history. But now the point of the book is that they're political migrants now, moving from one tendency to another. So here's a few things that people don't know about Hispanics in America. There are 62 million as of the census of the 2020 census, and 2/3 of them were actually born in this country. So and of the others, 8 million came in illegally and have naturalized or American citizens. So this is basically not a foreign population. Hispanics are Americans too, by and large. Of course, that's coming a little less true as all these new wave of illegals are coming in, but they're not all Hispanics.
Right. So this doesn't count the, 14 to 40 million illegal aliens.
Well, it discounts some of them. I think I don't agree that the number is that high, but it's maybe 14, 15 million, something like that. I agree with that, but it does count them. But those are the people who are not citizens, but 40 million were born in this country and 8 million have been naturalized. That's 48 million. So that's a huge population of voters. And so, whither these voters, right? And most immigrant populations in the U.S. for the last 150 years have started off as Democrats. Democrats are best organized in major cities where immigrants land. That's one reason. The Democrats have always been the party of government and government services. So they've got sort of the best first deal to immigrants, right? And it sounds good. So their idea, we're going to help the little guy, et cetera. It sounds good. It sounds compelling. And sometimes people come from places that are more socialist leaning. And so maybe the Democratic Party line sort of goes more naturally with what they've been hearing. But as people come in, their sort of underlying assumptions start coming to the fore and they start realigning. And we've seen that. So think about Italian Americans. 100 years ago, Italian Americans, who were fairly new to the country then, were mostly Democrats. But a poll was done in 2018 and found out that the two ethnic groups that are most Republican in America are German Americans and Italian Americans. So that kind of surprised me. I wasn't surprised about the German Americans, but Italian Americans, because that had not been my image exactly, although, it sort of makes sense. But over time, that group collectively saw its interest more represented with a more conservative party, and they went that way. So anyway, wrote the book, did a couple of very large scale polls. So one problem with ethnic polling is it's usually just a subsection of like 1,000 person national poll. So very often, if you want to see what the Hispanic breakout is or the African American breakout is of a poll, it might be 75 or 100 people. So it's hard to get very accurate polling with those little numbers. So we did a poll that was 2,700 people, Hispanic voters, and asked them all kinds of questions. And I had studied Hispanic polling and polling questions to Hispanics for years, and I was ready to go. So we asked a lot of the usual stuff and some unusual stuff. And I found out some not too surprising things. I found out the more religious Hispanics were, the more likely they were to be Republican voters. I found out that if people attended church of any kind at least once a month, more than 50% of Hispanics in that group were already Republican voters. So Now it's often reported that Catholic Hispanics are like 35% Republican, and that Protestants are like over 50%. Mm-hmm. But I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? I wonder, but since Hispanics often say they're Catholic, even if they have no real connection to the church, because it's a cultural thing, I just wonder if I put a church attendance filter on that, what I would see. And I found out in my polling that when church attendance was equalized, so that both Protestants and Catholics, I consider the people who attended services once a month or more, both groups, as of my major poll, were voting Republican. So it was sort of the same, actually, once you get people who really come. Mm-hmm. So that's, of course, I mean, the most reliable thing to determine, not maybe determine, but to predict how you're going to vote in America is religious attendance. So it's true in Hispanics and others. Blacks, a little bit less so.
Talk to me about the generational change. So, foreign born, non-foreign born are two categories, but non-foreign born is a pretty big category. And is there any meaningful difference between someone who their parents moved here, or their grandparents moved here, or their great-grandparents moved here, or their great-great-grandparents? And what does that tell us about how assimilation is going in America?
Yeah, assimilation is going pretty darn well in America. I saw this. I was kind of surprised, actually. I found out the big difference wasn't generational. The big difference was English language assimilation. Mm-hmm. The more English language oriented the people were, mm-hmm. the more Republican they were.
Wow.
And another thing that was interesting is how happy people were in this country. Now, Hispanics are thrilled with America by and large. It's compared to other groups. Sometimes on TV and the news, you just hear from people who are unhappy, right? In general, you assume everyone in America is unhappy with America, but that's not true. So, the Pew asked this question. I thought it was really interesting. I asked it too. Just wanted to make sure. And the more happy people were with their experience in America, the more likely they were to be Republicans or to vote Republican. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The more English oriented they were, the more, and there's also something they call in Rasmussen primary and secondary ethnic identification. So if you ask people what their race is, and they say Hispanic versus white or black or whatever, that's primary identification as Hispanic. But then they ask the second question, like the Census Bureau does. But regardless of what your race is, are you of Hispanic heritage? And if they say there's some other race like white or black, but then they say, yes, I'm of Hispanic heritage, that's a secondary that's a secondary identification ethnicity. So that's how the Census Bureau and with our polling capture that group. So there's big differences politically between those two groups. If their primary identity is Hispanic, they're more liberal and they're more democratic. If their primary interest is, or their secondary interest is Hispanic, however, they're more Republican and their views on immigration a little bit different. Although all the Hispanics, there are majorities of even Democratic Hispanics are really hostile to illegal immigration. There's no group of American citizen Hispanics who are friendly at all to illegal immigration. Why would they be? It hurts their interests. It adds competition. It hurts their reputation. A lot of you must have had this experience, right, Saurabh? So people who are illegal immigrants really resent illegal immigration by and large because it puts everybody in. It sort of causes people might look at me and think I'm illegal or whatever the attitude is. And it's like, yeah, it's embarrassing. It's like, gee. And I found out also from my study in this that there's another thing. People assume that if someone's grandfather was an illegal immigrant, that they're therefore going to be for illegal immigration. No, makes no difference. That's right. It's like, I can't help what my grandfather was. I know what I am. I was born in this country and I don't want people sneaking over here.
So talk to me about the ethnic breakdown. We say Hispanic, and what a lot of people that I know that are into demography say is there's no such thing. You have Cubans and Paraguayans and Brazilians and Mexicans and Ecuadorians and El Salvadorans. And it seems like we have a singular conversation. And, you know, people also like to play this kind of game, this kind of sleight of hand, where the pro-immigration crowd, mass immigration crowd, will say, well, golly gee, look at here at the Cubans. And then, you know, they'll pretend like all immigration is Cubans. And, well, that's not quite right. And then, you know, it's possible that some people are being uncharitable by picking out the most suboptimal group of people coming over. So walk me through the sort of ethnic breakdown on these matters.
Well, as is well known, Cuban Americans are quite conservative and Republican because they came from a communist country. They hate communism. Republicans seem to hate communism more. And being anti-communist sort of makes you pro-capitalist. And so they're looking, what's the party? And that's the most pro-capitalist. Well, so that's true. That's a generalization that's proven true. However, so, and maybe a more liberal and democratic group traditionally has been Mexican Americans, but also Puerto Ricans. But there's movement in both of those groups now. The movement depends on where you are in a couple of ways. If you're more religious, you're going to be more conservative and Republican. Well, I mean, it's religious maps to all kinds of other attitudes, right? It's a lot of social and moral stuff that Republicans are very different on than Democrats. But also, churches tend to emphasize law. So, I mean, you're a Catholic, I'm a Protestant. All the services are about is the law. What are we going to do about breaking it, right? It's all about the law. We take the law very, very seriously in Christian circles. And so that tends to make you can't be like friendly toward law breaking, like illegal immigration. So it kind of maps that way. But anyway, so the Mexican Americans, the Puerto Ricans, who are of course born American, are moving now. But they're not all moving at the same pace. The people who are the most assimilated. I think the best way to look at this is that Hispanics are really like other Americans. As they become more assimilated into the mainstream of America, they start voting like other Americans, and it maybe 25 years ago, 2/3 were more Democratic leaning. Now it's more splitting a little, maybe 45-55 right now. Some polling in the last month has shown that Trump's ahead in a hypothetical matchup against Biden. Harvard-Harris showed that the other day, and Gallup came up with a poll this week, their annual political party identification poll. Did you see that? They show which groups are, say, in the year 2023. So they're doing for last year, say they're Republican versus Democrat, or Republican leaning versus Democratic leaning. And Hispanics were now only 8 points separated the Republican leaners from the Democratic leaners. Well,
wow.
They've lost tremendous ground. The Democrats have lost tremendous ground.
Is that 46-54, or like there's a bunch of people who are neither?
There are some people who are neither, but it's in the it's more like what you said, but I'd have to have that right in front of me to know.
No, that's fine.
But also blacks have lost 20 points in affiliation to Democrats.
Wow.
When you look at both groups, they're still well ahead Democrats are still well ahead, but the number who are disaffiliating from the Democrats and affiliating with Republicans has shifted enormously. There's been another thing of young people are now moving away from Democrats. I mean, part of these are long-term trends, and part of them is the Biden effect, right? So we'll have to see what happens long-term. But I think overall assimilation is going pretty well with Hispanics, and I think the fact that this group is pretty new in America. So when I was born, these many years ago, there were only 5 million Hispanics in America. Now there are probably 65, 66 million as of today.
Wow.
So most people who are Hispanic in America or their forebears only arrived in the last 50 years, and many of them much, much more recently. So they're going to move a lot politically in a short period of time. I mean, finding their legs, finding out who they really identify with. So the worrisome thing for Democrats is that their hold on the white working class has been shattered over a lot of these working issues. And the thing I can't understand about the Democrats is how they think they're going to keep a long-term majority in the country with ethnic minority populations, the working classes of other ethnicities moving against them too. I think that first they lost the white working class. Now they're losing the Hispanic working class, and we see signs of the black working class moving too. What if it's not just the white working class? What if it's working class people moving? There are not enough college educated people to move the other direction to make up for that. So the Democrats, and there are plenty of Democrats like Roy Teixeira who are panicked about this. I write about this in my book, that they're really in trouble long term. And where does immigration come into this? A lot. Because as Roy Teixeira and certain other analysts who really watch this closely say, it's that with the Democrats compromised and went left on immigration in part so that they could get the Hispanic favor and get this group forever. Instead, it's alienating them, because it turns out that not that many people who are in the United States are thrilled about having more and more competition, especially from illegal aliens.
So, Jim, I hear everything you're saying, and I can just see the Chamber of Commerce functionaries, just absolutely excited at everything they're saying. Isn't this the argument for much more immigration from Latin America? These Hispanics, they become good Republicans in short order. Why not get the best of all worlds? We get the cheap labor and they vote Republican. What's the problem with that argument?
Well, the biggest problem is that we shouldn't use politics to determine who should be citizens. If you don't like your citizens, you shouldn't fire them and hire some more. And we have people, and I especially look at the case of Black Americans who are, America is the end of the line. So here's the problem with the free market. There can be a free market in capital. So if you're on the wealthier side, you can send your capital over to any country of your choice and make money and bring your money. But in labor, it's one way if you're an American, because whereupon people from around the world come here and work. We can't afford to go there and work because A, it's illegal, and they don't take it as gladly as we do, right? And secondly, Americans can't afford that. I mean, you imagine an American dad leaving his family and saying, "I'll send you back money. I'm going to go work in Mexico." Well, he miraculously is given a job down there, and he sends a quarter of his income back up. It's not enough to pay the bills here. It doesn't work that way. It's one way. So there can be no free market in labor, and so we've got a lot of people this is the end of the line. It's not just people. I say Black because because there are a lot of people who'd rather hire anybody but someone black. So to be frank, but there's also, what if you're in Appalachia? I mean, where do you go? You have no mobility. Someone can come in and take your job. You can't go and get someone else's job. Mm-hmm. And so what's wrong with it is it's greed, it's immoral, it's unpatriotic, it's ungrateful. The poor people of America, I mean working class, I don't mean pitifully poor, but the working people of America have fought every war. They've made the sacrifices, and you know, we educated people are showing like zero gratitude. So that's the first thing. The second, politically, yeah, it's great that people come to America and become Americans. That is great. And eventually they sort of vote like other Americans, but you know, it's like a 75-year project. Mm-hmm. So why are you trying to displace Americans we have now for what might happen to you in 75 years once people get completely assimilated into this country and their grandkids are voting Republican? Mm-hmm. It's crazy. I mean, that's not what drives it. It drives it for the Democrats some, right? They feel they're probably wrong, but they feel like they can get easy votes by bringing more people in. That's for for Republicans, that's not good strategy. But on the Republican side of things, the people who are for cheap labor, they're looking at it short term and what benefits them. I mean, who doesn't want to be a middle class? What bourgeoisie person doesn't want to feel like they're a big shot, having someone clipping their head rather than themselves, like our fathers did? Yeah, it's great. You know, I've got my own hedge clipper. But it's having a tiered labor pool and a society like that kind of strata where I'm up here and I've got some poor person who's just arrived and they're going to take my job for $8 an hour. That's not a good strategy. And I'll say this too, Saurabh. Say it's not $8. Say it's $12 an hour. You can't feed a family for $8 an hour. And I mean, it's not only you shouldn't, you can't. So what happens? Well, that means that there's no money for the doctor. So you show up at the emergency room. Your children are born in this country. They qualify for food stamps. You get that. So you get very high percentage of all the illegal alien families in this country are on one or more social welfare programs because they're not because they're bad, because they're poor. They're so dirt poor, and they're being hired at these terrible rates. So it's not fair. And what happens is, you know, we have something called the privatization of profits and the socialization of costs. I know you've heard this. And if it's like, yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to save some money and hire a cheaper worker? But what if that means that worker is forced to turn to the state for part of their income? I mean, I've made money, but everyone else living around me has lost money with that.
Makes a lot of sense. For our subscribers only segment, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, namely, what's the thing you're terrified about coming down the line on immigration policy? And then maybe some light questions as well. For those of you who don't know, this is our new subscriber program we're doing for season 4. You can go to YouTube and there's 2 membership options. There's Truthers and Statesmen. That's $4.99 and $9.99. Both groups get access to this weekly bonus clip that we're taping. They get the show 24 hours early, so you can actually watch it on Sunday after church if you'd like. And there'll be bonus episodes later in the season, chances to win tickets to live events that we host, and much, much more. So be sure to go to YouTube and subscribe. We are having a lot of fun with these first few clips that we've put out, some lighter fare and some darker fare. You get a little bit of both, the sweet and salty. So we'll go now back to the episode. We're grateful as always this week to bring you this episode in partnership with Upward.News. Upward.News is a fantastic political news website run by our friend Ari. Their daily brief brings you need-to-know news and insights that you won't find in the mainstream media. They've put out fantastic content on Instagram, on Twitter, and many other platforms. Sign up for their newsletters at Upward.News. Even with political insiders, many of whom listen to this show, it's helpful to have people who can collate the most important news items happening across the world every single week. And Ari does that with his various newsletters at upward.news. Once again, that's upward.news. Thank you so much for helping bring Moment of Truth to our audience. So, Jim, where can people keep up with everything that Numbers USA is doing and what you're up to? Where can they buy the book? Tell us how they can find you.
Well, Numbers USA is numbersusa.com. And we've made it pretty easy to join. It's a free membership, and we send you lots of stuff to be involved. We make it easy to call Congress, to send them emails, to go to town hall meetings, do all the things you can to influence them. We tell you everything you need to know. And just go to numbersusa.com and sign up. And then my book is available on Amazon and wherever you order books. It's called Political Migrants, Hispanic Voters on the Move. And it kind of tells you everything you need to know about the Hispanic experience in America and what their political thinking is and why it's changing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jim. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. We certainly enjoyed taping it. I will say something I really try to do my best as a young whippersnapper changing Washington is to give appropriate honor and praise to the people who have been fighting the good fight for many years. Numbers USA, Center for Immigration Studies, Federation for American Immigration Reform. These organizations were in the trenches for 25 years when there was no institutional response inside the Republican Party and the conservative movement against mass migration. They were the ones doing the research, marshaling the activism, getting out there, getting in people's faces. They're outspent 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 in every single fight they're involved in, and they've won. We have not gotten a mass amnesty since these organizations got organized a couple of decades ago. So thank your local immigration restrictionists, usually kindly boomers who have a lot of experience and wisdom. You may think they're not radical enough, but they've really done incredible work. Jim's one of those people, and as are many others. So we're grateful as always that you guys listen. Be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org to find AM Fridays, Gala for American Statecraft featuring Senator Vance and David Sachs. Be sure to rate and review this podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Be a truther or a statesman. Get the episode 24 hours early. Tune in to these bonus clips that we're taping and get many, many more perks. Be sure to rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and in general, send us a bunch of money, whatever you'd like, really, whatever form of support you can do. We always appreciate it. And we always appreciate you guys listening to this podcast. As always, thank you very much. And we will see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.